The Taunus region in Germany. I didn't really know what or where it was, but the past couple of years I had seen some posts on Instagram about a bikepacking event there, but it got a bit lost between the Transcontinentals, the Three Peaks, the Badlands, and so many more. So the Taunus Bikepacking event is a brainchild of this guy, Jesko, and is a 1,000-kilometer course that meanders through the Taunus region with a big variety of surfaces. Smooth gravel, a bit of mud when raining, paved roads, overgrown single tracks and everything in between. And about 18,000 meters of elevation. The start was a TT style start, with one rider leaving the camp every minute to spread out the field and not have a crazy 100 people peloton from the beginning.
Okay, have fun, thanks, bye.
The surroundings were beautiful, and thanks to the rain in the past months, everything was green and lush, and the smooth gravel was fun to ride.
Good luck, guys.
But it was never flat.
Steep.
In the first few hours I bumped into quite a lot of the other riders and we suffered together a bit on the steep slopes. Although it isn't a race officially, there was one clear favorite to finish first, and that was Robin Gempelle. The guy is a machine, and when he flew past me on a narrow single track, I was too slow to grab my GoPro. I could only capture him disappearing into the bushes. And he indeed finished first, in 2.5 days with a very minimal setup. I have no idea how he did that. As the day progressed, I settled into a nice pace, moving as much as possible and only having a quick stop to energize a bit. By the way, all these nice photos of the riders and the views are taken by Niels and Bite of Me. Links in the description. As the night fell, I rode till midnight and slept in a nice hut. Day 2 started a bit wet and gloomy, but the thought of reaching the first checkpoint lifted my spirits. The second day is where the real event starts, because your body starts aching from the day before. You just had a few hours of sleep and the finish line is still quite a distance away. And that is when you have to make the switch from a physical game to a mental game. The checkpoints were not manned, you had to stamp your own brevet card, and that strangely felt like a little reward. You worked for it and you could tick off the box yourself. Today was all about the Rhine Valley, first dipping down to the river and then climbing the riverbank walls on long switchback climbs. Who would have thought you could have 8-kilometer long climbs next to the Rhine? During my morning supermarket stop, I checked the tracker for the first time, expecting to be somewhere mid-pack, around spot 40 something, but I was 18th or 19th and the top 10 spot wasn't that far away. So when I got back on the bike, I started wondering if a top 10 spot was still possible. When the sun started going down, I was faced with a dilemma. There weren't any huts around the 200-kilometer mark. So what do I do? Have an early night or push through and ride past midnight for the second night in a row? I decided to keep going, and here you can see me pass a few others, jumping from the 16th spot to 9th. At midnight, I stopped at a hut just before checkpoint 2. The morning of day 3 was beautiful. Around 6 o'clock, with the sun peeking through the trees, I started the climb to checkpoint 2. Checkpoint 2 was at the top of a hill called Pferdskopf, Horsehead. And on top of that hill there is a 34-meter tall watchtower. And where did Jesko put the second stamp? At the top of said tower, of course. So after conquering the stairs and getting the stamp, it was back on the bike and onto checkpoint 3. Next were some single tracks, which were a bit tricky at places. The rest of the day consisted of beautiful gravel roads, single tracks, forests, nice views and a bit of sun. That night I slept in a big hut, and I was very lucky to be there. A big thunderstorm rolled in, and it started raining hard for hours on end. I later heard that others weren't that lucky and got soaked. Despite the rain and thunder, I slept pretty well and was out the door at 5. I had quickly checked the tracker and was still in 9th position. The goal this morning was reaching checkpoint 3, and the rain had stopped for a bit, but everything was wet and riding through long wet grass was quite cold. After a short steep climb, I reached the hut where the third and final stamp was located. I stamped my brevet card, loaded up the final section on my GPS and started the last 330 km to the finish line.
Ooh.
It had started raining again, and if you're wondering how I felt that morning, I was now close to Braubach, a small town where we would see the Rhine one last time. And during the pretty technical descent down to the river, I noticed I was losing pressure in my rear brake lever. And when I got into town, it had fully stopped working. My first proper mechanical during an ultra event. I was so lucky I was close to Koblenz, where I found a bike shop, and 2 hours later I was back on track. Unfortunately, I had lost a few spots in the ranking. It started raining harder, and with the joy of having a functional bike again fading, I got a bit of a dip in morale. I got quite cold, and when I reached the town of Bad Ems, I looked for a place to take shelter for a bit. And my tired brain picked the fanciest hotel, but they let me stay in the lobby for half an hour. When the rain stopped, I got back on the bike and continued my rather slow progress. After my bike shop stop early that day, I was in front of Jens, Nicolas and Lars, but they started overtaking me and riding away. I was really suffering and slow, I just had no power in the legs. But when the sun started shining again by the end of the day, I felt better. I looked at the tracker and started to make a plan. It was the last night, and if I wanted to beat them, I needed a head start in the morning. So I kept riding until I was back in front of them. I had set my alarm for a few hours of sleep to tackle the last 160 kilometers to the finish line. When I woke up, I immediately checked the tracker, and as expected, the others were already on their bikes. The The last morning was another beautiful one, and to wake up the body, there was some walking and tree jumping, and after almost 900 kilometers the bike felt like it weighed 100 kilograms. I passed Marco, who was asleep on a bench, and made sure not to wake him. It's one more spot, right? But not everything was okay. Quite suddenly my Achilles tendon started to hurt really bad, even to the point I could barely push. I had to slow down even more, and sometimes pushing on one leg. My morale plummeted and I got a bit scared. It was still 90 kilometers to the finish line.
So close. I don't want to scratch now, that would be fucking ridiculous.
After a quick stop at a gas station, I gingerly continued. The pain wasn't getting worse anymore, and for once the short hike-a-bike sections were a welcome change. Walking didn't hurt. I kept checking the tracker and I had a healthy lead on Marco, but Lars, Nicolas and the others were out of reach. I only had one more thing to do: get to the top of Feldberg and to the finish line.
Fucking made it.
I had made it to the top of Feldberg, the last summit and the unofficial finish line of the event. All that was left was a beautiful downhill to the actual finish. I want to thank Jesko for a fantastic event and route, the other riders and the whole crew of volunteers. It was so much fun and I fully recommend you give it a try if you haven't. And I finished 13th by the way, so very happy with that result.